Welcome back to the Teacher Experience. We are so excited to have you here yet again. Before we start, if you haven't already followed us on Spotify, Amazon and YouTube, we would be so grateful for you to just go off and click the follow button, because the more reach we get, the more people we can help and the more people we can either entertain or inspire. You guys can be the judge of that. So today we introduce the wonderful Rowena Hicks, who has over 30 years of experience within schools, previously having been a teacher, a specialist teacher, a SENCo, a tutor for the National Awards, and ending with a deputy headship before unfortunately reaching burnout. Now, Rowena is now an advocate for teacher wellbeing and beating burnout. So today we are delighted to talk to Rowena about her journey, her new book called Teach, Flourish, Thrive, and her new podcast called Beat Teacher Burnout. So without further ado, welcome Rowena.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be on here because I think what you're doing is you're spreading the word about teaching, about how hard it is, but also how there are strategies out there to make it more possible, more doable, and even find your passion for teaching. So good job.
Thank you so much. That's so kind. So our regular listeners will know that we start this podcast with our WWW, our What Went Well. So Rowena, can you please share your What Went Well for this week?
I think I was thinking about this, and I think I'm so pleased this week because one of the things that I do is inclusion and quality mark inspections, and it's one of the joys of life to be able to go into a school that is inclusive and go and celebrate the hard work of the teachers and the children, actually. So when I go in, I look for the good. I look to celebrate what's lovely. And obviously we look at things that can be improved because we're always learning, aren't we? But for me, it's a real joy. So for me, that's what went well this week.
Thank you for sharing that. As an aspiring SENCo, so my current role is assistant SENCo. It's so nice to hear that. And I love that you're celebrating teachers. It was such a big thing over the COVID period that we would celebrate anyone that worked in essential work. And I kind of wish that extended out now because I still feel like teachers and anyone that works within the NHS do such an amazing job. So it's great to hear that you're being inspiring as well through that. So thank you. Would you mind sharing your EBI for this week? So our Even Better If?
So one of the things that was one of the reasons I burnt out, I think, is because I never took a break and I would just keep going. I'd eat my lunch while I was on the phone to a pediatrician or whatever it was I was doing. So now my big challenge is to adapt my day, I suppose, to make sure I take breaks. And I would say probably 3 out of 5 of my days I did well. And I really noticed that even a small break where you get up, you have a quick chat with someone, things like that, or just grab a drink of water, that makes a really big difference, even if it's 2 minutes. So I'm trying to put it in my diary now to do that. So I've got 3 out of 5 days nailed this week. So next week I'm going for 4 out of 5, doing better breaks.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's something that I still really struggle with, actually. So I'm on my 4th year of teaching, and every day to myself, I need to give myself that 15 minutes. And actually Friday that has just been, I had mock week and it was really busy for me. And I had honestly 4 minutes probably to eat my lunch, and I should have given myself that time because the rest of the day, the afternoon, I felt myself being more chaotic. And I should have given myself that. So it's something that I'm also trying as well. So I can empathise with that.
Yeah. And actually the research shows that if we take a proper break, if we actually take a moment to breathe and to notice how we're feeling, just even to move a little bit, if we take proper regular breaks, we're more productive, we're more creative. So actually we're not doing ourselves any favours by not taking those breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, and my own experience of that as well. Completely understand. It's really hard as teachers, isn't it? Because in the moment, we want to do everything we can for the kids, and actually giving ourselves 15 minutes, the kids will benefit from that. Like you said, more creative, more present. Yes. So thank you. I'd love to hear about a typical day in the life of Rowena Hicks. So if you could share that with us, that would be great.
Okay, so since I left teaching, my day has obviously changed quite a lot. And what I do now is my focus is on supporting and training school staff. So it's teachers and TAs and leaders, but it's the majority is teachers. But so the start of my day every day now is journaling and some mindfulness, and I pray for those who believe in God. It centers my day, and it reminds me what I'm grateful for, where I'm going towards what I'm working at today, all those different things. And just taking a bit of time, I've discovered that if I forget to do that, sort of centering my day and planning my day and noticing how my body feels, because when I burnt out, it really impacted me physically. So I have to notice that every day and maybe do a bit of work to readjust myself. So my day starts with the journaling side of it. And then my day goes into a launch of things like planning, training, resourcing, social media, which I am learning very fast about. And the highlight of my day every day is when I meet one-to-one or small groups with teachers. That's what I love doing. And I love to be able to, I suppose, because I've done this for so long, I love to be able to meet people where they're at and I suppose troubleshoot with them for some strategies of how to either be a better version of themselves because they've almost lost themselves in the overwhelm and the busyness and the chaos of the job, or just to find a way of putting in a strategy to help them find joy or passion or energy. And actually, it's tiny little strategies every day that we can put in place that bring about that change in ourselves. And it's not a huge, big magic wand. It's small, regular, new habits. And I'm having to put them in place in my life as much as I'm helping others to put that in place for theirs. And I suppose the other big change for me with what I'm doing now is that my day doesn't finish at 3:30. Not that teachers ever finish at 3:30, for goodness sake. At 6, it doesn't finish then, because I have a lot of evening sessions with teachers, because obviously that's when they're free, or on Saturdays because that's when they're free. So I am very careful in my week now, and quite almost rigid with myself that I go to the gym 3, 4, or 5 times a week, depending on how my body feels. And I make sure that every day I connect with healthy people who I can learn from, although I learn from everybody every day, but I have to have other people around me who support me as well as the ones that I'm supporting. So I make sure I have a balance in my day, and we all need that balance. And I think one of the things I learned from being a teacher for so long was that we give out all day as teachers, and it's so intense in term time. And a lot of us then got ill at the first bit of the holidays, and then you hear everyone saying, oh, you're so lucky you have such a long holiday. And I'm thinking, no, really, I don't, because I've got all this work to do. I really need to help my brain to unwind and relax. What was I saying that about? I suppose because I am driven and I have been a workaholic, I have to address doing life differently. And so the connections with people and balance, and because we give out like we give out as teachers, we forget to find a way to restore ourselves, to rebalance our own energy. And actually there's a lot of sort of fancy words for it that psychologists use, and there's emotional burnout and all sorts of other sort of more technical terms that are used where we, the same with the NHS, we give out so much, but actually that quote, you can't give out if you're running on empty. You just can't do it anymore, which is why teachers get so overwhelmed. And so that's my passion, really, to learn how to do it better myself so that I can then help others better.
Thank you for sharing that. As you were sharing, I was actually thinking of a situation that happened with me. In my opinion, a great example of leadership. I went to her and said, my workload I'm actually struggling with. And as someone who I would describe as, I am a perfectionist, I am a workaholic, going to her and saying that I was struggling was actually quite difficult for me.
Yeah.
And I remember it took a lot for me to go in there. And she said to me, and no one in teaching has ever said this to me before, she said, what's going on in your life outside of school at the moment? And I said, well, I've just got engaged. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. She was like, you need to have time for that in your life. Like, how exciting. You have to plan for a wedding. You need to, she was like, do you do exercise? And I was like, well, no, I haven't really been. And she was like, you need to do that. And it was such a great example of leadership that actually I don't think is that common in teaching. She was like, you need time to plan this wedding. You need time to go to the gym. And it was great. And that no one had ever done that to me before. But from a leader and someone that, well, I do put pressure on myself to just work and do the best for the kids. It was amazing to have that and so important.
That's amazing that you've got someone, who's leading you and who's actually quite inspirational in that way. Because in my experience, that's quite rare. And I think teachers so often tell me they are perfectionists and they are workaholics and they're very driven and conscientious and all that sort of thing. And that is why so many teachers are struggling. And I'm doing an increasing amount of training actually to support teachers on working out how you can still be an amazing teacher, but not a perfectionist, because you have to bring balance into your day. So important. And there are ways you can do it and still still get the job satisfaction and still be able to be creative and do what you're really good at, but not that perfectionist sort of total 100% of the time level, because it's not sustainable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think everything you've just said, I genuinely feel motivated to now go and have a look at my life and have a look at what I need to rebalance. I think you've really highlighted some key things there. You said about all teachers wanting to refine that joy, that passion, that energy for teaching. But we do lose that along the way purely because we're so exhausted. And I think the key word that you've said there is balance, finding that balance in our day-to-day lives. And Miss Dimon touching on the fact that we do have important things going on outside of work life, and we need to find how do we excel in every single part of that, but without being a perfectionist, because that's what's going to lead to that burnout. So thank you very much. So next, I would love to hear about your journey from, I suppose, university, or the reason you decided to become a teacher, and sort of your journey through your career to where you are now.
Okay, so I've always wanted to be a teacher from this. I remember age 10 telling my mum that's what I wanted to do. I just loved anything that involved children and playing and supporting. And then, so I went to university and trained, and my first job was in London in Brixton. And I had 80% of my class had special needs. And in those days, it was an awful long time ago, probably before you were born, you didn't have teaching assistants or any support. Mind you, we didn't really do planning. We had no evaluation. There was no paperwork that came with the job. So all you did literally was teach.
That sounds lovely.
It was just beautiful. I can't tell you. It was a different experience. I mean, I had a blackboard and no photocopier or anything like that. So resourcing did take a lot of time, but I became passionate, and I talk about it at the beginning of my book, I think, because I discovered there was one child who she just wouldn't engage with my classes at all. She's not interested in learning at all. And, what was going on at home was tragic. But I discovered we tried some dance for an assembly, and she was a swan. And as soon as we discovered what she could be good at, the whole rest of her learning experience changed. And I sort of discovered that every single child is different. We know that anyway, but so different. And no one way is going to fit all of them. And since then, I've had a passion for special needs. I went abroad and worked in Poland and East Africa and Belgium. And so I went to orphanages and missionary schools and international schools for a while. But I suppose behavior challenge and risk of exclusion, that sort of thing was always a passion. And I came back, worked in specialist services for a while with behavior. And then I joined a team in Kent, and we went round different schools who were put into special measures, and we helped to turn them around. And that was the first time that I discovered the overwhelm and the impact of the overwhelm on school staff, I suppose. And I remember one day going into a school, and I set up my office, and I had a line of teaching assistants and teachers, and at the end of the day, the head teacher. And all they came in to say was, we are working so hard, but there is no backup, no support, no validation. You know, we feel unseen, unheard, sort of not valued at all. And we are on our knees, and we love the children, and we can't bear this for the children. And so I learned very quickly that, you know, as staff, if we can be our best version of ourselves, we're going to be the best teacher for the children. It's such a no-brainer. It's almost so obvious. Why aren't we investing more in ourselves as school staff? Because you can see the lesson where the teacher is exhausted and not creative and not excited because they are so stressed or depressed or whatever. And then the difference between the lesson of someone who is really valued, and, you know, like you were saying earlier, when a leader recognizes what you've got going on in life outside of school, you're going to go in and you're going to think, actually, I matter here, and they see me, and so I can give that. And it's crazy how your mind and your body work together. And it, you know, so anyway, going back to me. So then I did my master's, and then I did some teaching for I think it was the first cohort of SENCos who went through the national award. That was so fun. And then I became a tutor online for SENCos, because I, at that point, wasn't very well again. And then I went into London to some schools, which was a fantastic challenge. And that's where I became assistant head, and then deputy, and then moved back to Kent. And I suppose my passion has always been for the vulnerable, the weaker, those who need the extra support. And I am an advocate for those families, for the children, and actually for the adults, because at some point in our lives, we are all going to need a bit of extra support. We are all going to be needing to be seen. And I asked one teaching assistant one day, you know, I said to her, what is it that helps that I do each day? Is there something else that I could do more for you? And she said that the one thing that she valued more than anything was when I came in and asked how she was, not how her work was going or the children or anything, but she just felt that she mattered. And I think in school, so many of us go through a chaotic day and we don't feel that we matter, really. We fit into a machine that's going around so fast, but actually we need to slow it down and value each other more. So yeah, that's my story a little bit.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really exciting and interesting to hear about your really, really broad amount of experiences, but essentially all of your experiences have been rooted in your core values, and that's never faltered. And that's really, really lovely to hear. And that sort of core value of helping people, and that not just being limited to children, that's across the board with all types of school staff and whoever you're working with, that core value of making sure that everyone is okay, making sure that everyone has the experience they should be having is absolutely vital. So again, yeah, thank you for sharing some really personal stories, and I really resonated with the part you spoke about the TAs, and I read that in your book, which I do have in front of me.
Thank you.
Nice plug there for you. But I read it in your book, and I read some of those experiences. I think it was the tick box activity. I love the fact that this is interactive. The tick box activity, where you wrote a few examples or scenarios down, and one of those was about you had a line of TAs outside your office saying that they didn't feel valued, they didn't feel seen, and going through sort of your book and reading about those examples that we see every day. And I was hooked instantly, because every example you gave, it was like, wow, I felt that nearly every day, or I know someone that feels like that. I know someone that's come to speak to me and say, this is how I'm feeling. So I love that everything you say, again, is rooted in those core values, and you're being really open and honest, because I think for teachers to get past the tough situations we're in with workload and burnout, we need to be collaborative and try and find those solutions together. And actually, you talking about your TAs, some of my favourite friendships that I've got are from my TAs, because of the relationships I built within the classroom, and me having very similar conversations with them about, well, what can I do for you? Is how I've taught this lesson good? What's your opinion on the lesson I've done? And how can I help you outside of the classroom? And actually, do you want to go to the pub on Friday and go for a drink, and we'll talk about everything that's not to do with work, because we're both in the same boat. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So next, we would love to talk about this awesomeness. So we have got your book, Teach, Flourish, Thrive. I actually brought it originally to sort of have a look at, and I obviously manage or have strategic direction for ECTs and initial teacher trainers. And I wanted to have a look at it to see if I can use any tools out of it to sort of promote that well-being with them, because it's so prevalent as a induction tutor that all I do is talk about how to be a better teacher. But actually, to be a better teacher and to have the right training and to flourish, you need to have good well-being. So that's why I initially brought it, and now I've got hooked and I'm loving all the interactive tasks. But I actually forgot why I brought it, and I was just doing it for myself. So what I would love to hear about is what encouraged you to write Teach, Flourish, Thrive, and who your target audience is. So hopefully we can also help get that out to those target audiences for you.
I suppose about 4 years ago, I see it as God downloading 7 chapters. I was just very quiet one day, and I had 7 ideas of key points that I thought teachers needed to hear, because part of my job was as inclusion lead, and I'd been a SENCo for so many years, and behaviour lead, all that. I was so focused on helping everyone else, and I was thinking, if we could address some of these areas, it might be a way to perhaps look at teaching and learning in a slightly different way. And I'd just come back from some wellbeing training, and it was really good, but I left it and I never implemented anything from it. None of us who had gone, it was a great day, and actually probably just being out for the day was good, but it didn't actually have any lasting benefit. So my frustration was to think, why is it that there is some wellbeing support out there, but it's not really having an impact for staff? And we need to get practical, but also we need to be challenging teachers, especially, that in order to have better well-being, you've got to take some bold action, and you've also got to be vulnerable. And Brené Brown says, vulnerability is the greatest form of courage. And actually, it's so true, but it is going to be uncomfortable, and you are going to have to do some work. And that is the fact to start with. So that's why I decided back sort of 4 years ago that the book needed to be written. And then I just became completely immersed back in my role, and I was working, 12-hour days plus a day at the weekend. And I mean, my poor children, they were so independent growing up. And they were the ones who were saying to me, Mum, you can't sustain this. And I was starting to get more and more symptoms, I suppose, of unwellness. And then when I did burn out eventually, and had to stop work, I thought, right, I can't just sit here and do nothing. As I heal and as I read and research, and I mean, the statistics, 78% of school staff are saying they are stressed every day. I mean, and leaders, it's even higher, it's nearer 90%. And, the breakdown levels and the sickness due to work-related stress and all that is so high, and it is increasing. And so something's got to happen. So I sat down, I thought, right, while I learn how to heal myself, I'm going to think, what did I do when I was at work that helped other people? What helped me and what didn't help? because I'm quite naturally reflective, and I've had journals from years. So I looked back at my journals. I spoke to lots of staff that I have worked with, what was good, what wasn't good. I reflected on what behaviors I did that were not very clever in retrospect. That goes back to being a people pleaser and a perfectionist and a workaholic and all of that sort of thing. And so that then came into being what is a very practical book. And I have a course that goes alongside it that just goes a bit deeper, I suppose. And that's how the book came across. And interestingly, when it first came out, I gave it to various sort of friends and friends of family and things. And the response was from teachers was particularly powerful, but also teaching assistants, and then nurses came back to me about it. I had international business people, because actually there is burnout in every sort of part of life. People are experiencing burnout. There's some really lucky people out there who are not, who have incredibly supportive environments, and somehow they have the boundaries and the expectations and the ways of doing life that enables people not to encounter the overwhelm and the burnout. But life now, home life, you were saying earlier, what is going on at home? How do you go in and teach your class in an excited way if you've just had a whole load of arguments with your children? One refuses to get out of bed and then doesn't go to school, or, you have just life happens. You have then to go and do your job. It's really tough. So it's not just about the way schools are. But I suppose for me, ultimately, the reason I really wrote the book was because I didn't feel I could change the system. I tried speaking to some policymakers and I couldn't get to them. So I decided I couldn't change the system, but I could help us to change ourselves. And that's why I did it.
I love that ending to that explanation of why you chose to write Teach, Flourish, Thrive. The number of people that turn around to us teachers and say, well, why don't you try and change the system? Mm-hmm. And it's one, that's a huge job. And as a teacher, it's a catch-22. How do I find the time to try and change the system? And it would take collaboration, absolute collaboration. And that is the biggest part. And that's the reason you chose to write the book. That's part of the reason we've chosen to start the podcast, is because actually huge policy change and changing the system is a job that is huge. And personally, I don't know how you would tackle that. But actually, if we can give little nuggets of help along the way and start the conversation and continue the conversation together, hopefully we can have an impact. And even if we impact a few people, that is better than impacting no one and them still struggling through. So I'm just going to pick up on a few things you said, because it was amazing. You said about lots of people actually responding to your book, and it not just being teachers. And as teachers, we obviously talk about teaching all the time, but absolutely burnout is happening everywhere. And to know that people were really engaged in your book and have picked that up across the board is really good. And I hope that there's managers and leaders out there that really start to talk about well-being. Now, linking to that, I'm currently doing my NPQSL, so my National Professional Qualification for Senior Leadership. And we're currently looking at professional development. And the conversation came up about, well, we need professional development with well-being. But it's such a sticky concept, because how do you implement well-being? Because you have some leaders that go, right, well, to have good well-being, you can have an extra hour. But it's not tackling the root cause. And actually, as you were talking, and as I've been reading the book recently, we need something consistent every single week that is looking at well-being. And actually, I think implementing your book on a long-term scenario is good. So personally, in my school, we have CPD every week. Actually, wouldn't it be so great if we spent even 10 minutes every week talking in our CPD session about the next section of the book that we've done together? So this week I looked at the first half of chapter 1 of Teach, Flourish, Thrive, and these are the things I thought and these are the things I've implemented. And like you were saying, it provides that opportunity for us to be vulnerable, open ourselves up, have those conversations, but consistently revisit well-being. And it's something that as I become as I am a leader within a school and I'm working with ITTs and ECTs, it's something I would quite like to sort of start to implement a little bit more about long-term well-being. But again, it requires that conversation within senior leadership and everyone agreeing and everyone collaborating of where are we placing well-being on the chart of importance, the chart of what comes first. Is it well-being? Is it teaching and learning? Is it the behaviour policy?
One of the things that research has shown is that if when we look at well-being, if we're in teams, which obviously we are in schools, if the team can do it together, it's even more impact, because actually there's things in my book that you can address on your own, but actually if a team addresses them together, you can support each other's well-being. It's just going to be so much more effective, and to have a more effective team benefits everybody as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really hope the listeners are going to take this on board and sort of listen to everything we've said about how we can implement this. And you're drawing on research, which is really, really helpful.
There's so many things you were saying which I completely relate to in your past. In terms of my passion completely being for kids that have additional needs and need the extra support. I was an undiagnosed dyslexic throughout my whole school life. And my defense mechanism as a kid was, I just said, I'm just not smart. And that's fine. And I'm okay with that. And that was my whole childhood of the education system. And I used to always get the worst grades in the class, but that's fine. I'm just not smart. I was good at sport. And that was my whole mindset as a kid. And I went to university and I failed this statistics exam. And someone picked up my data and I basically flipped over the letters, classic sign. And I went for an assessment. And in that moment when someone told me, I didn't really believe it. I remember sharing it with Miss Wild at the time. And I was just like, no, I can't be. And it actually took me a good 6 months to process it, because you start unpicking your childhood and thinking, oh, well, that makes sense now. Yeah. And actually I wasn't dumb and I wasn't just not intelligent, which I had convinced myself to. Because even at university, I'd say to Miss Wild, oh, we're just not smart as everyone else. And that's okay. And it's crazy when you get that diagnosis. And now I love working with pupils that have just been diagnosed. And when they say no, I haven't. I'm like, that's okay. Talk to me as and when, and I'm their safe person in school, and I love it because I just think I had that person at university when I was diagnosed. So when you were talking, I was getting emotional because I was like, I feel exactly the same, and this is so important to me and like so passionate. Healing others helps heal yourself. There's so much I've learned from the kids, and so many of them had experiences where they just demonstrate so much resilience that I didn't even know if I would have in their situations. I was just wondering, do you have 3 takeaways from the book that you could share? 3 things that you think would be great for our listeners to hear?
Okay, so I suppose they'd be key things. One of my favourite things in the book is the statistic on self-awareness. And because for me, it's crazy. So I thought I was quite self-aware. I don't know what you two think of yourselves. I don't know what you'd say about each other. But if you ask your team on Monday, what percentage of the country do you think are self-aware? And just see what people say. I'm not going to ask you because you've seen the book, but people tend to just give all sorts of random answers. But the reality is that 90% roughly of us think we're self-aware, but in fact 15% of us are self-aware. And it's really important. The research around self-awareness is huge, and it's getting bigger because it's a really big topic at the moment in lots of fields. But to be more self-aware, you know how to respond to people better, you manage your emotions better, you're a better team player, you have more energy. There's so many things that come from better self-awareness, and that 15% statistic means statistically I'm probably not self-aware or not very self-aware, and that was a real shocker for me. So I've been working a lot on my self-awareness, and in the book, I suppose the key takeaway from it, the really simple takeaway, is after a situation, not to say to yourself, why did that go wrong? Why did they say that? But rather, what could I have done better? And actually, what could I have said to them that would have changed that meeting around, rather than why did that go so wrong? And that's really helped me. And I suppose in school, when I learned that, it changed the dynamic of communication, and I could help others to be more self-aware in their responses. And actually, that's amazing for parents, for children, for colleagues, in those meetings, which it gets a little bit stressed. And actually, if you can be self-aware, the one who holds it together and then thinks, what can we do here? It's very powerful. That was one. Another one is from research which shows that we need about 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions to stay healthy and positive and actually to thrive. Now, in my book, I tell of a story of coming in from work after I'd had a couple of arguments with my children, and I'd had a fight, with, I don't know what happened. It was all very difficult in the morning. I think one of my kids gave me a hug, so there's a positive in there. But I walked through the door of school. My bag got caught in the door. Someone said, "Good morning, it's so nice to see you." There's another positive. But actually, the negatives of my day before I'd even got in the door were far outweighing the positives. Now, we need to be watching, and we need to be mindful and aware of how many positives and negatives we're getting in a day, because otherwise we're not going to be in a state of flow. And there's a lot of research on flow. There's a man, Mikhail, somebody I talk about in my book. He's got a very unpronounceable surname, Chikelnicki or something. It's an amazing book. And he talks a lot about getting into this state of flow. And you probably recognize in your week where you have those moments where it all works and something, you're using your most valued strengths and the children are responding, and suddenly you have that moment of flow. But in order to have that through the day and at home and school, we need to have this 5-to-1, and that is a lot of positives. And that means that we, as staff, we need to be watching very, very carefully for the wins. So we need to be watching when a child smiles and says thank you, or when you recognize you're the safe adult for that child, or even when someone holds a door for you. Win. You need to be watching, because otherwise you are going to be well off kilter and out of balance in your hope to find a place where you can flourish or flow or thrive, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I think my third thing that has stuck with me for many years is when a senior leader who I really respect said to me, when I didn't go for a promotion, she said to me, "Rowena, you're good. You know you're good." And I said to her, "No, I don't. I really didn't. No one had told me. They just assumed because I was effective and I was efficient and I was busy, and they just assumed that I recognized that in myself. And yes, I kept getting promoted and whatever, but for me, that wasn't recognition for me. That did nothing for my self-validation, if you like. And I think as teachers, we go through the day where it's very chaotic. It's a massive machine, and we fit in, and each one of us is absolutely crucial. And I would say to everybody listening, if you're in school, you are absolutely crucial in there, because if you weren't there, think about who would miss you, what would drop, what would happen. Everybody's so important, but we're moving so fast from that moment we go in. We don't have time to go to the loo some days. We don't have time to get a drink. Most of us don't drink coffee hot, little things like that. And so we don't recognize the impact that we're having. And it's so important for our value and our worth to recognize and understand how much difference we make in the school. And if you are a class teacher, look at the children's faces when you come in. You are their safe space. You are they're probably their one person in their life, for some of them, who is predictable, who really, I would say, loves them. We really have this affection for these children because that's why we do it, isn't it? We want to change their lives for the better. We want to sow into them so they believe in themselves and they do their best. But actually, you can go through a whole day. I spoke to a secondary school teacher the other day, and he said, I went through the whole day without seeing another adult. Science. And I said to him, oh, don't you go and get a coffee or anything? No, I bring all my lunch in because I am flat out through the day, can't afford the time. And so where is his validation? Where is his sense of making a difference? And I would say we need to find internal validation and not expect external. If you have an observation and someone says, lovely lesson, Rowena, but actually, here's your point to work on. Now, what do you take away from that feedback? You take the second bit. Yeah, because that's how our minds are. But actually, we need to change that. And this is all about the self-awareness and the balance, because we need to sort of note, oh, gosh, that was really good. Note to self. Internalize the win. And that's all through the day, because the children give so much, but we've got to be looking for it. Even if it's just a child who doesn't usually give you much work, and one day suddenly, for no reason that you know of, they suddenly produce this lovely piece of work compared to the usual. What a win. So it is about spotting for yourself where you make the impact, because actually, I'm sorry to say, I think in a lot of schools, we don't do that for each other. Some schools are fab at it, but it is a rarity in my experience. So
thank you. It's interesting because it was just last night I was speaking to my partner. I'm new to the SENCo role, new to my inclusion team, and I joined in September. And I said to my partner last night, I haven't received any feedback and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And my partner was like, ask for feedback. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. Of course I can.
Right,
I should just ask for feedback. Yeah. And it wasn't something that naturally came to my mind, because as a perfectionist, and I am working on this, sometimes my innate response is to resist feedback and the fear of getting told I need to improve something, because as a perfectionist, it's really hard to take on things like that. It's something that I'm working on. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask for feedback. But what you just said, I should start finding internal validations as well. Those little things from the kids, definitely something that I can work on. I think it's a skill that you can improve. This sort of negative bias is, as a biologist, I've naturally looked into quite a lot. And there's a lot of theory out there that says, as humans, due to our evolution, we naturally focus on the negatives because that's a method of survival. So that's how we evolved. However, it can be changed. And there's a lot of research that shows people have a strong negative bias more so than others. And that's also normal. But it is something you can change, but it is a skill. I think my partner is naturally not as negative as me in terms of self-criticism and things like that. So I always look at him and think, oh, he finds it really easy. And I want people listening I want our listeners to know that for some people this is hard and it does take a lot of effort. I'm one of them. For some people it's easy and you will look at them and think, oh, I wish I could be more like that. But it is something that we can work on. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ms. Wild, did you have anything else?
I think the biggest thing I would like to say is just thank you. Like Jess was saying earlier, I've genuinely found today quite emotional. Let's not cry. You have hit so many things on the head, and we've had some really good conversations, and I thank you for showing your vulnerable side, because you are showing that it's okay to be vulnerable. and it's okay to have the conversation, and teachers are finding it really hard. And we hope for our listeners that this has been really insightful, and they take, if anything, they just take one thing and try and put it into practice. So thank you. I really, really, really appreciate it from a personal note, let alone anything else.
Please, can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and where they can buy your book from?
Oh, thank you. So if you go to my website, rowenahicks.com, that's nice and easy. So all the resources are there. I mean, the book is on Amazon. And I have a Facebook group called Preventing Teacher Burnout, which is very slowly growing. And it's people learning that you're not alone to be struggling in school. And it's okay to say that I'm struggling. And that's what it's there for, because teachers come to me and just say, I feel so on my own because everyone else looks like they're fine. And I can just say, actually, everyone else isn't fine. They're trying to cope. So that's what that group is for. It's a safe place to build community.